Total John Hancock here, and today I'm going to be discussing re-releases. When does it make sense to re-release a game? And first I want to discuss what's the difference between a re-release, a remaster, and a remake. Holy cow, that's a lot of R's. So a remaster is when the original code is upgraded to work on modern hardware, but the graphics have changed. A good example would be Borderlands. You know, the original Borderlands was updated with HD graphics and released on modern consoles, Xbox One, and it was, I do believe, a GameStop exclusive on physical. And so that's a good example of a remaster. Now, a remake is when a game is completely redone. And a good example of that would be the newest version of Final Fantasy VII Remake. And so that's a completely different game. It's nothing like the original, though there's going to be like an original mode that you can play like the original, but it is completely different. Now, another example of some like a remastered would be like the Pokemon games. And so Nintendo takes original Pokemon games and they remastered them for Game Boy Advance. And so Fire Red, I do believe, and Leaf Green are original versions of Pokemon Red Blue. And so that is an example of a remaster as well. So there's a ton of examples, but people get confused. Okay, a re-release to me is like the original code offered on either the same platform or something else, a re-release, okay? And re-releases happen a lot, but sometimes people get confused about them. Today I'm talking about when a re-release makes sense, okay? And so there's a lot of great examples, and then there's some terrible examples, and I am going to be discussing lots of them. So a re-release to me is something that makes sense, especially today. We've had many decades of video game history. There's been several classics come and go, and a lot of those games are not available to purchase. It's really sad, actually, to think about how many classics are out there for people to play. And, you know, unless you have the original hardware and the original version of the game, it's hard to play these classics. And so there's more and more companies, especially with video games becoming more mainstream, that are digging into their archives, that are going through their backlog and seeing what they can re-release without doing anything to a new audience. It's actually a good idea, and it does make sense, and it works most of the time. Now, re-releases, there's a lot of times they work best when the game is offered to a newer system. And so, you know, for example, there's many consoles out there. I think of a lot of like, you know, failed consoles out there, or consoles that have a hard time working now, like Xbox 360. And I think it's cool, like, you know, games out there that are offered on those platforms, and maybe even a failed platform, and offering it to a newer audience. And so, you know, to me, a re-release has to offer the original code. And a re-release is not a remaster, it's just the original game offered to a new audience. And so, you know, sometimes the controls have to be tweaked to a newer platform, but I prefer when a re-release offers the original code, when as best as possible. Sometimes that's impossible, but, you know, to me, that is what I prefer. There's been some awesome re-releases that have happened recently. You know, they just announced that Metal Storm, the Japanese version, is being offered by Limited Run Games, Castlevania Games. There's several. Retrobit, I think, is making the re-release. And, you know, Metal Storm is an amazing Famicom game, and the Famicom edition had some additional features, and it had like, I think, some like a cinema intro and some other things. I think I do believe is more difficult as well. So anyways, it's being re-released in its original form, the Japanese version, affordably. That's when it's done best, I think, is when it's offered affordably. A good example that I just brought up was Metal Storm. Metal Storm is an expensive game, especially the import version, hundreds of dollars, and it's being re-released on physical Nintendo cartridge. Makes sense. You know, Holy Diver was another one. It was never released in the United States. And so that's another idea for a successful re-release, is offering it to a region that never got it. Holy Diver was a Japanese exclusive. It was never, offered in the United States, and, it was offered on a Nintendo cartridge. There's times when re-releases, I would say, are not done correctly. And so I Am 8-Bit released Street Fighter 2 on physical Super Nintendo cart. Now, there's some controversy here because, for example, they offered this re-release for $100, and so I did pick one up. I did a video on it, and I think over time I've thought about this, and I think that a re-release has to be cheaper than what you can get the original for. If there's no difference, which that's what a re-release is, then you have to offer it at an affordable price. Now, there's a lot of people that play digitally, so there's a lot of re-releases, especially on the Nintendo Switch, a lot of arcade games, cheap, $10, boom, done, and I think that's fantastic. I think about all the iterations of Dragon's Lair that are out there. Holy cow. And they're always offered on new platforms at an affordable price, typically. The problem comes when you offer something and it's more expensive than when you can go on eBay and get the original. There's other versions that it's kind of up in the air. I know that Limited Run Games is offering a lot of Star Wars options, like Nintendo version of Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Shadows of the Empire. Those are cool. I saw the packaging. There's like a collector's edition and stuff. I'm not saying that I don't like that. A re-release should offer something that's cheaper than the original. If I can go out on eBay and purchase the original for cheaper than the re-release, then that's a problem in my opinion. And I know, there's some examples out there, not all. There's some re-releases that have really, very fancy packaging or collector's edition, but to me it doesn't make sense when I can get the original cheaper and more accessible. That's just my opinion. So there's many awesome re-releases that are happening all the time. A lot of digital, some on physical. There's a new re-release, especially for Intellivision fans, that brings up some interesting questions. And so Spiker Super Pro Volleyball was the last release, I do believe, for the Intellivision. And so Blue Sky Rangers are doing a physical run of this very, very expensive and hard to find game on physical, in a physical package. It's a re-release. It's the original code, the original game, and it's being re-released and sold on their website. They're sold out right now, but they hopefully will do more in the future. I'm definitely interested in this, but it's a good example of a successful re-release because that's an expensive game. Now, Spiker Super Pro Volleyball is like a holy grail for Intellivision fans. It's something I'm missing in my collection. And yet this company that owns the rights to it is re-releasing it on physical for, a fraction of the price. It's pretty cool. So I think the other thing that re-releases need to do is be different than the originals for collectors. And, that way, the original owners of the original game, can say this is, this identifies as the first release. And if you want to re-release something, have some type of marking or identification saying this is a re-release. Because what happens is some shady sellers out there will buy a re-release and try to offer it as the original, and that's a problem in my opinion. That's the only reason why I would want a re-release to look different than the original, or some type of marking so that buyers can easily identify the difference. And so that's it. I think there's many successful re-releases out on the market, some digital, some physical, some good, some bad. So I want to hear from you. What do you think are the best re-releases ever to be offered? And I think a lot of people get confused with what a re-release is versus a remaster or a remake. And it's really confusing now because we have modern day television, so there's a lot of games that are being remastered for our modern day TVs. But I'm really talking about original re-releases, and it's kind of tough. They're out there. I gave an example of a few, hope this helps. And I want to hear back from you. What are your favorite re-releases? And what makes a good re-release to you? I listed why I like specific re-releases, some good, some bad, and I want to hear from you what you think. I want to thank everybody for the ongoing support. I'm back to teaching and back to long hours. So stay tuned. I have many more videos planned. This is the Immortal John Hancock. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. You take care.